The rain fell on Portland like a judgment, gray sheets hammering the windows of the one-bedroom apartment that Alara Mercer now called home. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, surrounded by 12 cardboard boxes containing everything she had left after 8 years of marriage. The divorce papers lay on the kitchen counter, still warm from the printer at her lawyer's office, the ink of her signature barely dry. 32 years old and starting over. The phrase echoed in her mind like a cruel joke, something people said to make failure sound like opportunity. She had been an art teacher at Lincoln High School for 6 years, guiding teenagers through watercolors and charcoal sketches, helping them see beauty in ordinary things. Now she could barely see past the rain streaming down her window. Her phone buzzed against the hardwood floor. An email notification from a law firm she did not recognize, Morrison and Associates, with a subject line that made her pause, regarding the estate of Victor Mercer. Alara opened it with numb fingers, expecting spam or some elaborate scam targeting recent divorcees. Instead, she found a formally worded letter that read like something from another century. Dear Ms. Alara Mercer, we are contacting you regarding the last will and testament of Mr. Victor Mercer, deceased as of November 1984. Per the specific provisions outlined in Mr. Mercer's estate documents, his property was to remain in trust until such time as his designated heir experienced what he termed a significant life transition, defined explicitly as divorce, termination of employment, or comparable circumstance. The finalization of your divorce proceedings has triggered this provision. You are hereby named sole beneficiary of the following. One residential property located in the Mojave Desert, California, comprising 47 acres with all structures and contents therein. She read it 3 times. Victor Mercer. The name stirred something in the depths of her memory, a whisper from childhood that she could not quite grasp. She called her mother. Margaret Mercer answered on the 4th ring, her voice carrying that careful neutrality she had perfected over decades of avoiding difficult conversations. Alara did not bother with pleasantries. Mom, I just got an email about someone named Victor Mercer. A will. He left me property in California. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Alara checked to make sure the call had not dropped. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice had changed, tightened into something close to fear. Victor was your great-uncle, my uncle, technically, though the family never spoke of him much. He disappeared from public life before you were born. A pause weighted with decades of secrets. Whatever he left you, Alara, you should refuse it. Sign whatever papers you need to sign to walk away. Why, what did he do? He was a troubled man. Brilliant but troubled. He made powerful enemies, got involved in things he should not have. And anyone connected to him, Margaret's voice cracked, just promise me you will not go to that place. Whatever is there, it is not worth it. Mom, I need you to tell me what you are talking about. I cannot. Not over the phone, not ever if I can help it. Just trust me on this one thing, Alara. Please, Virang. The call ended with Margaret's plea hanging in the air like smoke. Alara sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, rain still drumming against the glass, and felt something shift inside her. For 6 years, she had played it safe, married a man who valued stability over passion, taught art instead of making it, buried her dreams under layers of practicality and fear. Her mother's warning should have scared her. Instead, it lit a spark she thought had died years ago. 3 weeks later, Alara's Honda Civic groaned up the last stretch of California highway before the road dissolved into desert. The air conditioning had given up somewhere around Bakersfield, forcing her to drive with windows down, hot wind whipping her dark hair into tangles. The landscape had transformed gradually from the green dampness of Oregon to the brown sprawl of Central California to this, an endless expanse of sand and rock and sky that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of the world. She had quit her job at Lincoln High, packed her 12 boxes into a storage unit, told no one where she was going except her lawyer, who needed a forwarding address for the paperwork. Her phone had lost signal 40 minutes ago, and she was navigating by a hand-drawn map the law firm had faxed her, following landmarks that felt like riddles, past the Joshua tree, shaped like a dancer, left at the red rock that looks like a sleeping giant, straight until you see what you came for. And then she saw it. The mansion rose from the desert floor like a mirage, Spanish colonial architecture, bleached by decades of sun, until the white stucco had turned the color of old bone. Red tile roof missing patches like a mouth missing teeth. Windows boarded over with graying plywood. Wild sage and brittlebush growing through cracks in the foundation. Nature slowly reclaiming what humans had abandoned. Alara stopped the car and stepped out into air so hot and dry it felt like breathing through cloth. The silence struck her first, not the peaceful quiet of a library, but something watchful, expectant. The house seemed to be holding its breath. She approached the front steps, noting the state of decay, paint peeling in long strips, a porch column leaning at an angle that defied physics. Yet there was something beneath the deterioration. Hints of former grandeur in the carved wooden doors, the wrought iron railings twisted into shapes of climbing vines, the stone fountain in the front yard now dry and filled with sand. The keys from the law firm felt heavy in her hand. She had expected a single key, maybe two. Instead, she held a ring of at least a dozen, some modern, some antique, all labeled with tiny tags and handwriting she did not recognize. As she climbed the porch steps, something shifted in her pocket. She reached in and pulled out a glass marble, blue and gold swirling together like sky over water. She stared at it, pulse quickening. She had not put this in her pocket. She was certain of it. She did not even own any marbles. Yet holding it felt familiar, like muscle memory from a dream. A flash of something crossed her mind. A large, warm hand placing the marble in her small palm, a deep voice saying words she could not quite hear. She had been young, very young, 8 maybe. She shook her head and pocketed the marble. The desert heat was playing tricks on her. That was all. The front door opened with a groan that echoed through the house like a moan of recognition. Alara stepped inside and felt the temperature drop 20 degrees. The thick adobe walls holding on to the night's coolness is like a secret. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that penetrated the boarded windows, and the air smelled of sand and cedar and something else. Something that reminded her of oil paint left out too long. The grand foyer stretched before her, a space designed to impress. A curved staircase swept up to the second floor, its wooden banister carved with grapevines and leaves. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, crystal drops dulled by decades of dust, swaying slightly in the draft from the open door. Faded tapestries clung to the walls, their images too obscured to make out. But what struck Alara most was not the decay. It was the sense that someone had simply walked away and never returned. Furniture remained arranged as if awaiting guests. A porcelain teacup sat on a side table near a window, stained with the memory of long cold tea. Books lay open on surfaces as if their readers had been interrupted mid-sentence. A shawl draped over the back of a wingback chair, positioned as though its owner had just stepped away to answer the door. She moved through the ground floor slowly, cataloging details. The kitchen with its cast iron stove and icebox that predated modern refrigeration. The dining room with a mahogany table set for 12, china still arranged in the cabinet. A sitting room where a Victrola record player stood frozen, a disc still on the turntable. She brushed the dust away and read the label, Clair de Lune by Debussy. Each room told the same story, a life interrupted, a moment frozen. Whatever had happened to Victor Mercer, he had not planned to leave. The staircase called to her. She climbed it slowly, one hand on the banister, feeling the wood groan beneath her weight. Not protest, she thought, recognition, as if the house were waking up. The second floor held 4 rooms. 3 had their doors closed. One, at the end of the hall, stood ajar, a sliver of light cutting through the darkness. She pushed it open and found herself in a study. Bookshelves covered every wall, floor to ceiling, packed with volumes in multiple languages. Maps hung between the shelves, some modern, some that looked centuries old, with pins and markings she could not decipher. A brass globe stood near the window, its surface worn smooth in patches from countless hands, tracing journeys across oceans. And on the desk, illuminated by the single beam of light that had drawn her here, sat a leather-bound journal. Alara crossed to it, heart hammering. The leather was cracked with age, the spine threatening to fall apart. She opened it carefully, and the handwriting inside made her breath catch. Sharp angles, confident strokes, clearly masculine. The first entry was dated October 8, 1972. They must never find it. Not greed that guides my hand, but necessity. What I have hidden here is more than mere paint and canvas. It is truth. And truth in the wrong hands becomes the instrument of its own destruction. The powerful have always understood this. They do not fear weapons or armies. They fear exposure. They fear the light. Ilara turned pages, scanning entries that spanned years. References to places she did not recognize, names that meant nothing to her, and repeated mentions of something called the collection. One entry from March 1978 stopped her cold. They have threatened me directly now. Caldwell called this morning, his voice smooth as always, carrying that particular cruelty of men who believe their position places them beyond consequence. Return what does not belong to you, Victor, he said, or we will come for everything you love. I know what everything means. Not the paintings, not this house, Margaret. The child she carries. My only connection to innocence in a world I have come to understand too well. I must disappear. It is the only way to protect them. Let them think me mad. Let them think me dead. As long as they stop looking, as long as they leave my family alone. Ilara read the passage again. Margaret. Her mother's name was Margaret. The child she carries. The implications crashed over her like a wave. Victor had not been a distant great uncle. He had been close enough to her family to fear for them. Close enough that their safety mattered more than his own life. A sound from downstairs shattered her focus. The front door, which she was certain she had left open, slamming shut. She froze, listening. Footsteps on the tile floor, heavy, deliberate. Someone who was not trying to be quiet. Her eyes swept the study for a weapon, landing on a heavy brass letter opener on Victor's desk. She grabbed it and moved to the doorway, pressing herself against the wall. You can put that down. The voice came from the bottom of the staircase, deep and weathered like old leather. If I wanted to hurt you, I would not have announced myself by letting the door close. Ilara did not move. Who are you? Someone who has been waiting 40 years for you to show up. A pause. My name is James Thatcher. Colonel James Thatcher, retired. I was Victor Mercer's friend. And right now, I am the only reason you are going to survive the next 24 hours. She descended the stairs slowly, letter opener still in hand. The man standing in the foyer was tall and broad-shouldered despite his age, with silver hair cut military short and a face weathered by decades of desert sun. He wore a faded work shirt, khaki pants, and boots caked with dust. Over his shoulder hung a rifle, carried with the easy familiarity of someone who considered it an extension of his body. Mercer. She stopped on the bottom step, keeping the height advantage. My name is Ilara Mercer. I know who you are. Thatcher's eyes, sharp blue beneath heavy brows, studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. You have his eyes, Victor's eyes, that focused stare that sees through everything and everyone. How did you know I was here? I have watched this house for 4 decades, checking the property, chasing off trespassers, waiting. He moved toward the sitting room, gesturing for her to follow. Victor told me someone would come. He did not know when or who, but he was certain. The right person, at the right time. And here you are. Ilara followed him into the sitting room where he lowered himself into the wingback chair as if he had sat there 1,000 times before. Perhaps he had. Victor left instructions, Thatcher continued. If someone from his family ever came to claim the house, I was to make sure they understood what they were getting into, and to make sure they did not die before they could decide what to do about it. Die? Ilara remained standing, gripped tight on the letter opener. You are being dramatic. Am I? Thatcher reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a photograph, yellowed with age, edges curling. He held it out to her. This was taken in 1983. 2 people came here from the local historical society asking questions about Victor's art collection. They left with a man in a black suit. Neither of them was ever seen again. Ilara took the photograph. 3 figures stood in front of the mansion. 2 middle-aged people with nervous expressions and a man in dark clothing whose face made her stomach clench. Sharp features, cold eyes, a smile that never reached them. The man in the suit, Thatcher said. I saw him again this morning, parked on the road about 3 miles out, watching the house through binoculars. He has not aged a day in 40 years. That is impossible. That is what I thought. Could be a scene, a nephew, some kind of family resemblance taken to extremes, or maybe the people Victor was afraid of have resources we cannot begin to understand. Thatcher leaned forward, his voice dropping. Either way, they know you are here, which means we need to move fast. Move fast doing what? Finding what Victor hid, understanding why it matters, and deciding whether you are willing to risk everything to bring it into the light. Thatcher stood, moving to the window and peering through a gap in the boards. Victor was not just an art historian, Alara. He was a CIA operative during the Cold War. His job was tracking down artwork stolen by the Nazis, following the money trails and the black market networks. But somewhere along the way, he discovered that something worse than theft. Worse how? Worse, like people in our own government were part of the problem. Politicians, generals, wealthy families, all buying up stolen art at bargain prices, laundering it through museums and foundations, building reputations on the suffering of others. Thatcher turned to face her. Victor started collecting evidence, and then he started collecting the art itself, taking it back from the people who had no right to it. He spent 20 years building a collection that could expose the whole rotten system. And then he disappeared. And then he died. Thatcher's voice hardened. November 1984, car accident on a desert road. Except I saw the wreckage, Alara. That was no accident. That was murder made to look like one. The word hung in the air between them. Murder. Her great-uncle, killed for trying to expose the truth. The collection, Alara said. It is still here? Hidden somewhere in this house. Victor never told me exactly where. Safer that way, he said. If they ever came for me, I could not tell them what I did not know. Thatcher moved toward the door, but he left clues, breadcrumbs for the right person to follow. And something tells me you are that person. Alara thought of the marble in her pocket, the flash of memory it had triggered, a child's hand, a warm voice, a promise she could not quite remember. Show me, she said. Thatcher drove her to his ranch in a pickup truck that had seen better decades, the suspension groaning over every rut in the dirt road. The property sat 12 miles from Victor's mansion, nestled between two hills that provided natural protection and clear sight lines in every direction. A modest wooden house, a barn, and a workshop arranged around a central yard where a windmill turned lazily in the evening breeze. You cannot stay at Victor's place tonight, Thatcher said as they parked. Not until we know what we are dealing with, and not until you know how to deal with it. The interior of his house was sparse but comfortable. Military memorabilia on the walls, photographs of men in uniform, a flag and a shadow box. The kitchen smelled of coffee and gun oil, a combination that somehow felt appropriate. Thatcher poured 2 cups and sat across from her at a worn wooden table. You know how to handle a weapon? I'm an art teacher. That is not what I asked. Alara shook her head. My ex-husband wanted to take me to a shooting range once. I said no. Guns make me uncomfortable. They should. That is what makes them useful. Thatcher took a long sip of coffee. I'm not going to put a rifle in your hands tonight. But before you go back to that house, you need to understand some things. How to read a situation. How to know when you are being followed. How to survive if everything goes wrong. You sound like you are expecting a war. I am expecting people who have killed before and will kill again to protect their secrets. Thatcher's eyes met hers, deadly serious. Victor spent 40 years building that collection and protecting the truth. He died for it, and the people who killed him are still out there, still powerful, still willing to do whatever it takes to keep the past buried. Then why tell me any of this? Why not just let me walk away? For the first time, something softened in Thatcher's weathered face. Because Victor asked me to. Because he loved your family, even from a distance. And because some truths are too important to stay hidden, no matter what they cost. They talked through the night. Thatcher told her about Victor, the brilliant young art historian who had joined the CIA in the 1950s, whose expertise in European painting made him invaluable for tracking the flow of Nazi-looted art through the black markets of the post-war world. How Victor had discovered that the networks selling stolen masterpieces were not just foreign criminals but American citizens, some of them in the highest positions of power. He told her about the collection, works by masters that the official records listed as destroyed or lost, paintings by women artists whose names had been erased from history, sculptures from colonized nations smuggled out under the guise of preservation. Victor had spent 2 decades gathering them, hiding them, waiting for a moment when the world might be ready to see the truth. And he told her about the Raven Consortium, the name Victor had given to the network of collectors, dealers, and politicians who controlled the underground art market. At its head, according to Victor's records, was a man named Richard Caldwell, whose family had made its fortune buying art from Nazi intermediaries at pennies on the dollar, and whose political career had been built on the sanitized version of that history. Caldwell is still alive? Alara asked. Senator Richard Caldwell, Virginia, 7 terms, one of the most powerful men in Washington. Thatcher refilled her coffee. If Victor's evidence is real, if the collection can prove what he claimed, Caldwell will do anything to stop it from coming out. He has already killed once. He will not hesitate to do it again. Dawn was breaking by the time Thatcher finished. Alara sat in the growing light, exhausted but more awake than she had felt in years. Why me, she asked finally. Victor had decades to go public. He could have found journalists, prosecutors, anyone. Why hide everything and wait for someone like me? Thatcher was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and brittle. He left this with his lawyer, to be included with the inheritance documents. I was not supposed to show it to you unless you asked. He handed it across the table. I think you have earned it. Alara unfolded the paper. Victor's handwriting, the same sharp angles she had seen in the journal. To whoever reads this, if you have come this far, you are either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both. I was both, in my time. I could not take what I knew to the authorities because the authorities were compromised. I could not go to the press because the press could be silenced. I could only gather the evidence, protect it, and wait for someone who would have the courage to use it. I chose to wait for family. Not because family can be trusted more than strangers, but because family has something strangers do not. A stake in the truth. What I have hidden is not just evidence of crimes, it is the legacy of those who were wronged, the stolen voices of artists whose work was taken, erased, forgotten. To expose the truth is to give those voices back. If you are reading this, you carry my blood in your veins. You carry my hope in your hands. What you do with both is your choice. But know this, the truth does not fade. It only waits for the right eyes to find it. Alara read it twice, feeling something settle in her chest. Not fear, though the fear was there. Something else. Purpose, direction. The sense that, for the first time in years, her life was pointing towards something that mattered. I need to go back to the house, she said. I need to find what he hid. Thatcher nodded slowly. I figured you would say that. He stood, reaching for the rifle that leaned against the wall. Then we had better get started. They returned to Victor's mansion in the full light of morning. The desert stretched in every direction, empty and vast, making Alara feel simultaneously exposed and invisible. Thatcher had given her a radio, the kind that did not require cell towers, and shown her how to use it. 3 clicks if you need help, he had said. I can be there in 8 minutes, less if I push it. She entered the house alone, at her own insistence. Whatever Victor had hidden, whatever clues he had left, she needed to find them herself. The marble in her pocket seemed to grow heavier with every step. She started in the study, going through Victor's desk systematically. Drawers full of papers, most of them mundane. Bills from decades past, correspondence with academics, notes for articles he had never published. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a false bottom she discovered only by accident, she found a small leather pouch. Inside was a key. Brass, old-fashioned, with a tag attached in Victor's handwriting. Debussy, the Victrola. She hurried downstairs to the sitting room, where the record player stood just as she had found it. She examined it carefully, running her fingers along the edges, looking for anything unusual. Then she noticed the bass, heavier than it should be. She knelt and found a seam, almost invisible, running along the bottom edge. She pressed, and something clicked. A small drawer slid out, no bigger than a cigarette case. Inside was a rolled piece of paper and another key, this one smaller and more modern. The paper was a note in Victor's hand. You found the first breadcrumb. Good. The collection is in the cellar. behind the fireplace that does not belong. Use the marble you have carried since you were 8 years old. You will understand when you see it. The marble. She pulled it from her pocket, holding it up to the light. Blue and gold, sky over water. She still could not remember where it had come from, only that flash of warmth and a voice she could not identify. The cellar door was behind the kitchen, hidden by a shelf that took her 20 minutes to move. The stairs descended into darkness, the air growing cooler with each step. She used her phone's flashlight, sweeping the beam across stone walls marked with symbols she did not recognize. At the bottom, the cellar opened into a larger space. Wine racks lined one wall, bottles covered in dust and cobwebs. Storage crates filled another corner, their contents long forgotten. And at the far end, a fireplace. Except it was wrong. The stones were newer than the rest of the cellar, the mortar a different color. This fireplace had been built later by someone who wanted it to look old but had not quite managed it. She approached slowly, examining the stones, looking for a mechanism, a hidden catch, anything that might explain Victor's cryptic instructions. Her fingers found nothing. She pressed, pushed, pried. Nothing moved. The marble. You will understand when you see it. She held it up, letting her phone's light shine through. The blue and gold swirled like clouds in a sunrise. And then she saw it, a small indentation in one of the stones, perfectly round, exactly the size of the marble. She pressed the marble into the indentation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she heard grinding, stone against stone, and a section of the fireplace wall swung inward. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of oil paint and old canvas. She stepped through the opening and found herself in a chamber that stole her breath. Paintings, dozens of them, stacked against the walls, hanging from makeshift hooks, leaning against each other in careful arrangements. She moved among them in a daze, unwrapping canvases, recognizing styles and techniques from her years of teaching art history. A woman emerging from shadow, her face half lit, unmistakably Baroque. A figure in the style of Caravaggio, with brushwork she had only seen in textbooks. A small portrait signed with initials she recognized from her studies. Works by artists the world thought were lost forever. And then she found the one that made her knees buckle. A simple landscape, a field of golden wheat under a swirling sky. The brushstrokes were short, passionate, almost desperate in their intensity. In the corner, barely visible, the initials VG. She sat on the cold stone floor, surrounded by millions of dollars of art, and wept. Not from joy or shock, but from the weight of understanding. Victor had spent his life gathering these pieces, protecting them, waiting for someone who would know their value, not just monetary value, historical value, human value, the voices of artists who had been silenced, erased, forgotten. And now that someone was her. She did not know how long she sat there. Long enough for her phone's battery to drop into the red. Long enough for the cold to seep through her clothes and into her bones. When she finally stood, her legs ached and her head swam. She needed to tell Thatcher. She needed to document everything. She needed to figure out what to do next. She climbed the cellar stairs and emerged into the kitchen, blinking in the late afternoon light that filtered through the windows. The house was silent, too silent. She froze, listening. No bird song from outside, no creak of the old building settling, just a profound watching stillness. And then she saw the note on the kitchen table. Paper she had not put there, held down by a stone she did not recognize. Ms. Mercer, we should talk. Midnight tonight. I will be waiting. D.A., her blood turned to ice. Someone had been in the house while she was in the cellar. Someone who knew her name. Someone who was connected to the man Thatcher had seen this morning. The man in the black suit who had not aged in 40 years. She grabbed the radio and clicked 3 times. Thatcher arrived in 6 minutes, rifle raised, moving through the house with the precision of a man who had cleared buildings in actual wars. He found nothing. Whoever had left the note was long gone. D.A. Thatcher studied the note, his face grim. Dominic Ashford. He works for Caldwell. Has for decades. His father was Heinrich Ashford, a Nazi war criminal who escaped prosecution by becoming useful to certain American interests after the war. He was in the house while I was down there. And he did not hurt you, did not take anything. Thatcher looked toward the cellar door. He wanted you to know he could. That is a message. What kind of message? The kind that says, we know where you are, we know what you are looking for, and we can reach you whenever we want. Thatcher folded the note and put it in his pocket. You need to leave. Tonight. Take what you can carry and go somewhere they will not think to look. I am not running. You are not equipped to fight. Not yet. Alara thought of the paintings in the cellar, the faces of artists whose voices had been stolen, the weight of Victor's letter in her pocket. Then equip me. Thatcher studied her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Victor said you would be stubborn. Said it ran in the family. He moved toward the door, gesturing for her to follow. Come on, we have work to do. The next 3 days blurred together. Thatcher taught her like a drill instructor, demanding and relentless. How to notice when a vehicle appeared too often in her rearview mirror. How to move through a building without making sound. How to read the desert landscape for signs of human presence. How to use the terrain itself as a weapon or a shield. Between lessons, she returned to the cellar, documenting the collection with photographs and notes. 23 paintings in all, plus a handful of smaller works on paper. She cross-referenced them with databases on her laptop, finding matches in the registries of stolen art maintained by Interpol and the FBI. Works valued collectively at a minimum of $6 million. Maybe more. But the paintings were only part of what Victor had hidden. In a locked chest she found using the second key, she discovered something even more valuable. Documentation. Photographs of sales records. Letters between dealers and collectors. A list of names written in Victor's hand, with Richard Caldwell at the top. And tucked into the lining of the chest, she found a single sheet of paper with a message that changed everything. These works were slashed from history to protect the guilty. But look closer. I have hidden the final evidence where only the wounded can reveal it. The Caravaggio carries the truth in its scars. The Caravaggio. She returned to the painting she had noticed on her first visit, the figure emerging from shadow. Looking at it now, with fresh eyes and better light, she saw what she had missed before. A long diagonal slash across the canvas, so precisely cut that it was almost invisible unless you knew to look. She brought the painting upstairs into the study where the light was better, examined the slash with a magnifying glass Thatcher had provided, and saw that it was not damage, it was intentional. The cut separated 2 layers of canvas. Victor had hidden something inside the painting itself. She worked carefully, using a palette knife to separate the layers without causing further damage. And between them, she found a folded document, a list of names, dates, amounts, a record of every transaction the Raven Consortium had made since 1947. Who had bought what, from whom, for how much. Proof that some of America's most respected families had built their fortunes on art stolen from Holocaust victims. Proof that Richard Caldwell was not just complicit, he was the architect. Her hands shook as she photographed every page. This was it. This was what Victor had died to protect. Evidence that could bring down a senator, expose decades of corruption, and restore the truth to countless families who had lost everything. But evidence was worthless if no one saw it. And now she understood why Victor had been so afraid. The people who had killed him were still out there, still powerful, still watching. On the 4th night, Alara sat in Victor's study, surrounded by his books and maps and memories, trying to figure out her next move. Thatcher had contacts in the journalism world, people who had helped him in the past. But going to the press meant going public, and going public meant becoming a target. The phone in her pocket buzzed, not a call, an email. From a sender she did not recognize. Ms. Mercer, I know who you are. I know what you have found. And I know what happened to Victor 40 years ago. If you want the whole truth, meet me at 1247 Maple Street, Alexandria, Virginia. Come alone. Midnight 3 days from now. Some secrets should only be shared between family. She read it 3 times. Alexandria, Virginia. That was Caldwell country, walking into the lion's den. But the phrase at the end stopped her cold. Between family. She called Thatcher. It is a trap. His voice left no room for argument. Ashford leaves a note, and now you get a mysterious email offering secrets? They are trying to isolate you. The email mentions family. They know about your connection to Victor. Of course they would use that angle. What if it is not Ashford? What if someone else knows something? Alara paced the study, her mind racing. Victor wrote that the truth was too dangerous to share with anyone. But what if there was someone he trusted? Someone who has been waiting just like you were. Thatcher was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Victor had one weakness, a woman he loved before everything fell apart. Her name was Eleanor. She married Richard Caldwell in 1972, 2 years after Victor met her. It destroyed him. Eleanor Caldwell, the senator's wife? If she is still alive, she would be in her 70s. And if anyone knows the truth about what happened to Victor, it would be her. Another pause. But Alara, if this is a trap, you will not come back. And if it is not a trap, if she really knows something, and I do not go. Alara stopped pacing, staring out the window at the desert night. Then I am just like everyone else who has ever let fear win, and Victor's truth stays buried forever. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Thatcher sighed. I cannot stop you, but I can make sure you are ready. She heard him moving, the clink of metal, the rustle of fabric. Tomorrow we train harder, and before you leave, you are going to learn how to shoot. Alara ended the call and sat in the darkness, the weight of the decision settling over her. 3 days. Then she would walk into the home of her enemy and find out whether the truth was worth dying for. She thought of her mother's warning, that first phone call that felt like a lifetime ago. She thought of Victor's letter, the hope he had placed in family he had never met. She thought of the paintings in the cellar, the stolen voices waiting to be heard. The truth does not fade. It only waits for the right eyes to find it. She had found it. Now she had to decide what to do with it. Outside, the desert wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the old windows. The house seemed to sigh around her, settling into its bones after another day of watching and waiting. 3 days until Alexandria. 3 days until she met whatever waited for her there. She pulled Victor's journal from the desk and opened it to a random page. His handwriting filled the margins, cramped and urgent, the words of a man racing against time. November 1984. They are closing in. I can feel it. But the collection is safe, hidden where only someone with my blood can find it. I have done what I can. The rest is up to whoever comes after. If you are reading this, whoever you are, know that I did not give up. I did not surrender. I only ran out of time. Finish what I started. The world deserves to see the truth, even if the truth is ugly. Especially if the truth is ugly. That is the only way any of this meant anything. Alara closed the journal and held it against her chest. In the darkness of the study, surrounded by the ghosts of her great-uncle's obsession, she made her decision. She would go to Alexandria. She would meet whoever had sent the email. And she would bring Victor's truth into the light, no matter what it cost. The wind outside died down. The house fell silent. And somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of an engine starting up, then fading into the night. Alara did not sleep. She sat in Victor's chair, watching the stars wheel overhead through the gap in the boarded windows, waiting for dawn, waiting for whatever came next. The road from Mojave to Santa Fe stretched like a scar across the American Southwest, 500 miles of asphalt threading through desert and mountain and mesa. Alara drove through the night, checking her mirrors every few minutes the way Thatcher had taught her, watching for headlights that stayed too long or followed too close. The 3 paintings she had chosen to bring, wrapped in protective cloth and hidden under a blanket in the trunk, felt like stowaways fleeing a burning ship. She had left the mansion at dusk, taking a circuitous route that added 2 hours to the journey, but made it nearly impossible to follow. Thatcher had wanted to come with her, but she had refused. His face was known to whoever was watching. Hers, hopefully, was still just a name on a document. The sun rose somewhere over Texas, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded her of the paintings she had left behind. 20 works still hidden in Victor's cellar, protected by stone and secrecy. 20 voices still waiting to speak. She had photographed everything, backed up the files to 3 different cloud services, and memorized the most important details in case all the technology failed. Santa Fe appeared on the horizon like a promise, adobe walls glowing gold in the morning light. She found the address Thatcher had given her, a converted hacienda that housed the Santa Fe Art Conservation Institute. The building looked unassuming from the outside, just another southwestern structure blending into the landscape. But Thatcher had assured her that what happened inside was anything but ordinary. Dr. Helena Vance met her at the door. The woman was somewhere in her 60s, silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched on a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once. She wore a linen shirt stained with what might have been coffee or might have been something more arcane, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent a lifetime looking at things most people never noticed. Alara Mercer. Helena's voice was surprisingly warm, at odds with her severe appearance. James called ahead, said you were bringing something that might make my year considerably more interesting. I hope that is a good thing. In my line of work, interesting is always good, even when it is also terrifying. Helena stepped aside, gesturing for Alara to enter. Come, let us see what Victor left for the world. The examination room was a temple of precision. Climate-controlled air hummed through vents positioned to prevent any draft from disturbing delicate surfaces. Specialized lighting rigs hung from the ceiling, capable of illuminating artwork from every angle and in every spectrum. Helena donned cotton gloves and unwrapped the first painting with the reverence of a priest handling relics. For 2 hours, Alara watched Helena work. UV light revealed underdrawings and previous restorations. Infrared cameras penetrated layers of varnish to show the original brushwork beneath. Chemical analysis identified pigments that had not been manufactured since the 19th century. Each test added another layer of confirmation to what Alara had suspected but not dared to believe. Helena stepped back from the examination table, removing her glasses to rub her eyes. Her hands were trembling slightly. This one, there ain't. She pointed to the smallest of the 3 paintings, a portrait of a woman emerging from shadow. This is not in the style of Caravaggio. This is Caravaggio. The technique, the pigments, the canvas weave, everything matches his documented works from the Malta period. The official records list this painting as destroyed in a warehouse fire in Munich, 1945. But here it is, whole, preserved, worth at minimum $3 million to the right collector. And the others? The landscape is almost certainly Van Gogh, though I will need more time to confirm. The third appears to be Artemisia Gentileschi, one of the most important female painters of the Baroque era. Helena turned to face Alara, her expression caught between wonder and fear. Do you understand what you are sitting on? The paintings you left behind, if they are comparable in quality and authenticity, we are talking about a collection worth at least $6 or $7 million. More if there are pieces we have not yet identified. Alara felt the weight of the number settle over her. $6 million. Enough to disappear, to start a new life somewhere far from senators and shadows. Enough to forget everything Victor had sacrificed. It is not about the money. The words came out sharper than she intended. Victor did not hide these paintings for 40 years because he wanted to get rich. He was protecting them, protecting the truth about where they came from and who stole them. I know. Helena moved to a filing cabinet and retrieved a folder thick with yellowed papers. Victor sent me copies of his documentation before he died. I have kept them safe, never knowing if anyone would come to claim them. Now that you are here with the physical evidence to back up what he discovered, we can finally do something about it. She spread the documents across a table, photographs of sales records, letters between dealers, names that Alara recognized from the list she had found hidden in the Caravaggio. The Raven Consortium, Helena said. That is what Victor called them. A network of collectors, dealers, and politicians who have been trading in stolen art since the end of World War II. At the top of the network, controlling the largest transactions and the most valuable pieces, the Caldwell family. Senator Richard Caldwell. His father started it. Richard inherited the operation along with the family fortune, and he has spent his entire political career making sure no one ever looks too closely at where that fortune came from. Helena tapped one of the photographs. This is a receipt from 1947. The buyer is listed as Harrison Caldwell, Richard's father. The seller is Heinrich Ashford, a Nazi officer who escaped prosecution by providing intelligence to American agencies after the war. The item sold is described only as Mediterranean landscape, oil on canvas. Based on the dimensions and the price paid, Victor believed it was a work by Claude Lorraine, stolen from a Jewish family in Paris in 1942. Ilara studied the document, her stomach churning. And you have kept this for 40 years? I have kept it and added to it every rumor, every suspicious transaction, every whisper I heard in my decades of working in art conservation. But evidence is worthless without someone willing to use it. Helena met her eyes. Victor could not go public because the people he was accusing had infiltrated every institution he might have turned to. The FBI, the Justice Department, even some of the major museums were compromised. He was alone, and they killed him for it. I am alone too. No. Helena reached across the table and gripped Ilara's hand. You have the paintings, you have the documentation, and you have something Victor never had, the element of surprise. They do not know what you have found. They do not know what you are planning. For the first time in 40 years, we have an advantage. That afternoon, Ilara called the number Helena had given her. Marcus Holloway answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the weary energy of someone who had been fighting losing battles for too long. Helena told me about you. Marcus did not waste time on pleasantries. Said you might be the most dangerous woman in America right now, or the most foolish. Can I be both? A surprised laugh crackled through the phone. I like you already. How soon can you get to New York? She flew out the next morning, leaving the paintings in Helena's climate-controlled vault. The Voices' reclaimed office occupied a converted factory in Williamsburg, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, staffed by a dozen people who looked like they had not slept in weeks. Marcus met her at the door, a tall man in his early 40s with a disheveled beard and eyes that had seen too much injustice and refused to look away. His team gathered in a conference room that smelled of coffee and desperation. Rachel Chen, an investigative journalist whose byline Ilara recognized from Washington Post exposés. David Okonkwo, a human rights lawyer who had represented African nations in their attempts to reclaim colonial-era artifacts. Dr. Samuel Reyes, a forensic art expert whose testimony had helped convict 3 major art dealers in the past decade. Marcus laid out the situation with military precision. 23 paintings confirmed authentic, total value estimated at $6.7 million. Documentation linking the Raven Consortium to decades of illegal art trafficking. Evidence suggesting that Senator Richard Caldwell had ordered the murder of Victor Mercer in 1984. The problem, Marcus said, pacing in front of a whiteboard covered in names and arrows, is that Caldwell is not just powerful. He is protected. Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Connections to both parties. Donors in every major industry. If we go after him and miss, he will bury us so deep no one will ever find the bodies. Then we don't miss. Ilara leaned forward, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. We go public in a way he cannot control. Not a newspaper article that can be killed, not a lawsuit that can be delayed. A public exhibition, live streamed to the world, with every piece of evidence on display. Rachel Chen nodded slowly. If enough people see it simultaneously, they cannot suppress the story. It becomes too big to bury. We will need security, David added. International observers. Someone with enough clout that attacking the exhibition becomes a diplomatic incident. I can reach out to UNESCO, Marcus said. They have been looking for a high-profile case to demonstrate their commitment to cultural heritage protection. This could be exactly what they need. The planning consumed the next 6 days. Ilara slept in snatches, catnapping on couches between strategy sessions. She spoke to Helena daily, coordinating the transport of the remaining paintings from Victor's cellar. She learned to navigate the labyrinth of international art law, the competing claims and jurisdictional nightmares that had allowed the Raven Consortium to operate for so long. On the 7th day, her phone rang at 3 in the morning, an unknown number. Ms. Mercer. The voice was calm, cultured, with an undertone of menace that made her skin crawl. My name is Dominic Ashford. I believe you found my note. Ilara sat up in the darkness, heart pounding. What do you want? I want to offer you a way out. The paintings you have discovered belong to people who have legitimate claims to them. Private collectors who have owned them for generations, whose families paid fairly for what they received. You are interfering in matters you do not understand. I understand that your father was a Nazi war criminal. I understand that he sold stolen art to Americans who should have known better. I understand that people have been killed to keep this secret. A soft laugh echoed through the phone. Victor Mercer told similar stories. He died alone on a desert road, his paranoid fantasies buried with him. Is that what you want for yourself? Victor Mercer was my great-uncle. Alara's voice hardened. And he was murdered by people working for Richard Caldwell, which means people working for you. Silence stretched across the connection. When Ashford spoke again, his voice had lost its smoothness. You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, the consequences will be on your own head. The line went dead. Alara sat in the darkness, trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. They knew where she was. They knew what she was doing, and they were giving her a deadline. She called Marcus. We accelerate the timeline. Whatever we were planning to do in 2 weeks, we do in 4 days. The next 72 hours blurred into a fever dream of activity. The exhibition space, a converted warehouse in Red Hook, was transformed overnight. Security systems installed, camera crews scheduled, invitations sent to journalists and diplomats and art historians from around the world. Helena supervised the installation of the paintings herself, arranging them in a narrative that told the story of stolen art from Nazi warehouses to American living rooms. On the third day, Alara received an email from the mysterious address that had first contacted her. The Alexandria offer still stands. Tonight, midnight. Some truths are worth the risk. She showed it to Marcus, who shook his head. It is a trap. They are trying to take you out before the exhibition. Or it is Eleanor Caldwell, finally ready to tell what she knows. Alara stared at the screen. If she has evidence we do not have, testimony that could corroborate everything, we need it. And if it is Ashford waiting with a gun, then at least we will know for certain whose side everyone is on. That night, against Marcus's protests and Thatcher's furious phone calls, Alara drove to Alexandria alone. The address led her to a quiet residential street lined with oak trees, the kind of neighborhood where senators and lobbyists raise families behind carefully manicured hedges. The house at 1247 Maple Street was dark except for a single light in an upstairs window. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, watching for movement, before finally gathering her courage and walking to the front door. It opened before she could knock. The woman who stood there was in her 70s, frail and elegant, with silver hair and eyes that held decades of secrets. She wore a simple robe, no jewelry, no makeup. The wife of one of the most powerful men in Washington looked like a ghost of herself. Alara, Eleanor Caldwell's voice was barely above a whisper. You look so much like him. Victor, those eyes that saw everything and feared nothing. You knew him. I loved him. Before I married Richard, before everything went wrong, Victor was the only man I ever truly loved. Eleanor stepped aside, gesturing for Alara to enter. Come inside, we have much to discuss, and not much time. The house was decorated in the understated elegance of old money, but Eleanor led her past the formal rooms to a small study at the back. The walls were lined with photographs, and Alara found herself looking at images of Eleanor through the decades, always smiling, always posed beside her powerful husband. Eleanor noticed her gaze. Prison walls come in many forms. Mine happened to be gilded. She settled into a chair and gestured for Alara to sit across from her. For a long moment, neither spoke. I sent you the emails, Eleanor finally said, and I sent you the video of what happened to Victor. Alara's breath caught. The accident that was not an accident. I have surveillance footage that Dominic Ashford sent to Richard as proof of completion. I have been keeping it for 40 years, waiting for the right moment. Eleanor's hands trembled as she spoke. Richard does not know I have it. He does not know about any of the evidence I have collected. He thinks I am a broken woman who long ago accepted her place. Why now? Why contact me? Because Richard is about to announce his candidacy for vice president. In 6 months, he will be one heartbeat away from the most powerful position in the world. And because I am dying. Eleanor pulled back her robe sleeve to show the port for IV medication implanted in her arm. Cancer. The doctors give me 3 months, perhaps less. I spent 40 years being afraid. I will not spend my last days the same way. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick folder, papers and photographs, and what looked like cassette tapes from another era. This is everything, every transaction I could document, every conversation I recorded, every crime I witnessed Richard commit or order others to commit. including Victor's murder. Alara took the folder with trembling hands. Why did you stay? All these years, if you knew what he was, why not leave? Because leaving would have meant dying. Richard made that clear from the beginning. Eleanor's voice hardened. And because I had a daughter to protect. A daughter I gave up when Richard discovered she was not his child. The air left Alara's lungs. What? Victor and I had an affair in 1970. When I became pregnant, I tried to leave. Richard found out. He threatened to have Victor killed immediately if I did not end things and marry him as planned. I agreed, hoping to protect the man I loved. But I could not hide the pregnancy, and Richard forced me to give up the baby for adoption. Alara felt the room spin around her. The baby, what was her name? Eleanor looked at her with eyes full of 40 years of grief. Margaret, her name was Margaret. The world collapsed into a single point of understanding. Margaret, her mother. Victor was not her great-uncle. He was her grandfather. Eleanor Caldwell, wife of the man who had ordered his murder, was her grandmother. Richard never knew the child survived the adoption system, Eleanor continued. Never knew Margaret grew up, married, had a daughter of her own. But I kept track, always, watching from a distance, making sure my granddaughter was safe. You knew about me this whole time. I knew, and I stayed silent, because silence was the only protection I could offer. Eleanor leaned forward, gripping Alara's hands with surprising strength. But now you have found Victor's collection. You have the evidence he gathered, and you have what I can give you. Together, we can finally destroy Richard Caldwell and everything he built on blood and theft. Alara sat in Eleanor's study until dawn, absorbing revelations that rewrote her entire understanding of her family. Her mother knew, Eleanor explained. Margaret had learned the truth when Victor contacted her in 1980, 4 years before his death. The two had met in secret, father and daughter reuniting after decades apart, sharing what little time they had before the Raven Consortium closed in. Margaret had kept the secret to protect Alara, just as Eleanor had kept her secrets, just as Victor had hidden his collection. 3 generations of silence, all in service of the same cause, protecting those they loved from the consequences of truth. When Alara finally left, the folder of evidence tucked under her arm, the sky was lightening over the Potomac. She drove back to New York in a daze, her mind racing through the implications. Marcus met her at the warehouse, his face etched with relief and exhaustion. I thought you were dead. When you did not answer your phone for 6 hours, I thought they had gotten to you. They did not. Alara handed him the folder, but I got to them first. The team worked through the day, integrating Eleanor's evidence with what they already had. The video of Victor's murder was grainy and damaged, but Dr. Reyes confirmed it was authentic, filmed on equipment consistent with 1984 technology. The audio recordings, transferred from ancient cassettes, captured conversations between Richard Caldwell and Dominic Ashford that left no room for misinterpretation. This is enough, Rachel Chen said, her voice hushed with disbelief. This is enough to bring him down. Not just him, Marcus added. Everyone connected to the consortium. We are talking about indictments across multiple states, international arrest warrants, civil suits that will take decades to resolve. Alara thought of Victor, lone in his desert mansion, gathering evidence he knew might never see the light. She thought of Eleanor, trapped in a gilded cage for 40 years, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to use what she had collected. She thought of her mother, carrying the weight of truth in silence, trying to give her daughter a normal life. When do we go public? Tomorrow night. Marcus looked around at his exhausted team, at the warehouse full of priceless art and damning evidence. The exhibition opens at 7. Live streams to every major network. By midnight, the whole world will know. That night, Alara stood alone in the exhibition space, surrounded by paintings that had been hidden for decades. The Caravaggio glowed under museum lighting, the slash in its canvas repaired, but still visible, a scar that told its own story. Beside it hung a placard she had written herself. This canvas was cut in an attempt to erase the past, but history bleeds truth, and truth once revealed refuses to be buried. She thought of all the artists whose work surrounded her, the women whose names had been stripped from their paintings, the Jewish families who had lost everything, the colonized peoples whose cultural heritage had been stolen and sold. Each painting was a voice that had been silenced, waiting for someone to listen. Tomorrow they would speak. Tomorrow the world would finally hear. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she did not recognize. Enjoy your exhibition while you can. By morning you will wish you had taken my offer. Alara read it once, then deleted it. Fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. She walked among the paintings one last time, touching the frames, whispering names she had learned from Victor's notes. Artists who had been forgotten, families who had been robbed, a history that had been deliberately erased. I found them, she said to the empty room, to Victor's ghost, to all the voices waiting to be heard. Now let me finish what you started. Outside, the New York night hummed with traffic and sirens and the restless energy of a city that never slept. Tomorrow would bring chaos, confrontation, and consequences she could not predict. But tonight she was ready. Tonight the truth would begin its long journey into the light. The morning of the exhibition dawned gray and cold over Brooklyn, a November sky pressing down on the city like a lid on a boiling pot. Alara had not slept. She had spent the night in the warehouse, checking and rechecking security protocols, reviewing the placement of each painting, memorizing the speech she would deliver to the assembled press. Her hands trembled when she tried to hold a coffee cup. Her heart had not stopped racing since Alexandria. Marcus arrived at 6 with his team, all of them running on adrenaline and determination. Rachel Chen had coordinated with journalists from 12 countries, ensuring that the story would break simultaneously across multiple time zones. David Okonkwo had UNESCO representatives on standby, ready to invoke international protections the moment the evidence went public. Dr. Reyes had authenticated every piece, creating documentation that would stand up in any court. By noon, the line outside the warehouse stretched around the block. Art historians, journalists, diplomats, and ordinary citizens who had heard rumors of something extraordinary. Security personnel from a private firm Marcus trusted checked identifications and bags at the entrance. Inside, camera crews positioned their equipment, testing angles and lighting. Alara stood backstage, watching the crowd through a gap in the curtains. So many faces, so many potential witnesses. Every person who walked through those doors became another pair of eyes, another voice that could carry the truth forward. Her phone buzzed, a text from Thatcher. Watching the live stream from the ranch, Victor would be proud. Give them hell. She smiled despite her nerves. The old soldier had wanted to be there in person, but they had agreed it was safer for him to stay in California. If something went wrong, someone needed to remain free and uncompromised, someone who could continue the fight. Another text came through, this one from her mother. I'm here, back row on the left, I love you. Alara's breath caught. Margaret had not told her she was coming. They had spoken twice since Alexandria, awkward conversations weighted with decades of unspoken truths. But her mother was here now, ready to witness the culmination of everything Victor had started. At 6:30, Marcus found her. We have a problem. His face was taut with controlled panic. Caldwell's people filed an emergency injunction an hour ago. They are claiming the paintings are stolen property and demanding the exhibition be shut down. Alara felt ice spread through her veins. Can they do that? They are trying. David is on the phone with the judge right now, but even if we win, the delay could give them time to do something else, something worse. She thought of Ashford's text, the casual menace in those words. They had known this was coming. They had planned for it. We open anyway. Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. Stream everything. Get every piece of evidence in front of cameras before anyone can stop us. If they want to shut us down, they will have to do it in front of the whole world. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Victor's granddaughter, all right. Stubborn to the bone. 5 minutes before 7, David called with the news. The judge had denied the injunction, citing insufficient evidence that the paintings belonged to Caldwell's family. Moreover, the judge had issued a protective order preventing any further attempts to interfere with the exhibition until a full hearing could be scheduled. We won? Alara could not keep the disbelief from her voice. We bought time, David corrected. They will come at us again, harder. But for tonight, the exhibition goes forward. The doors opened at 7. The crowd flowed in like water through a broken dam, filling the exhibition space with murmurs and gasps and the constant click of cameras. Alara watched from the small stage at the center of the room, heart pounding, as strangers encountered paintings that had been hidden for decades. A elderly woman stopped before the Artemisia Gentileschi, tears streaming down her face. Her hands reached toward the canvas but did not touch, hovering inches away as if afraid the painting might dissolve. My grandmother spoke of this. Her voice was barely audible, but the quiet in the room carried it like a prayer. She said it hung in our house in Florence. She described every brushstroke to my mother, who described it to me. I thought it was lost forever. A young man in a yarmulke stood transfixed by a landscape that had once hung in his great-grandmother's apartment in Vienna. He pulled out a photograph, comparing the image to the painting before him. The match was exact. A group of art students clustered around the Caravaggio, debating techniques and provenance in excited whispers. One of them noticed the repaired slash and fell silent, reading the placard Ilara had written. These were the voices Victor had wanted to speak for. These were the eyes he had wanted to see. At 7:30, Ilara stepped to the microphone. 6 weeks ago, I was an art teacher in Portland, Oregon. I had just finalized my divorce. I had no idea what I was about to inherit or what it would cost me to claim it. She paused, letting the words settle over the silent crowd. My name is Ilara Mercer. My grandfather was Victor Mercer, an art historian and former CIA operative who spent 20 years gathering the evidence you see around you. He was murdered in 1984 for what he knew. Tonight, we finally tell his story. She spoke for 40 minutes, laying out the history of the Raven Consortium, the network of theft and deception that had funneled stolen art from Nazi warehouses to American mansions. She named names, Richard Caldwell, chief among them, presenting documents and photographs that traced transactions across decades. When she showed the video of Victor's death, the grainy footage playing on screens positioned throughout the warehouse, the crowd fell into absolute silence. The images were stark, brutal in their clarity despite the poor quality. A car racing through the night, another vehicle, headlights dark, emerging from a side road. The impact, the roll, and then two figures approaching the wreckage, one carrying a canister. Ilara watched the screens, seeing for the first time the moment her grandfather died. Eleanor had been right to keep this hidden. No one should have to watch someone they loved be murdered. But the world needed to see it. The truth required witnesses. When she finished, the applause started slowly, a few people at first, then more, until the entire warehouse thundered with the sound of hundreds of hands. Ilara stood at the microphone, tears streaming down her face, feeling something she had not felt in years. Purpose, belonging, the sense that her life finally meant something beyond mere survival. And then the doors burst open. Richard Caldwell strode into the warehouse, flanked by lawyers and security personnel, his silver hair immaculate, his political smile firmly in place. Behind him, Ilara glimpsed Dominic Ashford, the man who had not aged in 40 years, watching with cold amusement. Ladies and gentlemen, Caldwell's voice cut through the case, amplified by the microphone his team had commandeered. I apologize for the interruption, but I could not allow these slanderous accusations to go unchallenged. The camera swung toward him. Every live stream in the world now showed the senator from Virginia facing down the woman who had just accused him of murder. Ms. Mercer has presented you with a compelling fantasy constructed from forged documents and desperate lies. Victor Mercer was a troubled man, a thief who stole from legitimate collectors and created elaborate conspiracies to justify his crimes. His death was a tragedy, a car accident on a desert road, nothing more. Ilara stepped forward, microphone in hand. Then explain the video, Senator. Explain why your own wife has given testimony confirming everything I have said. Caldwell's smile flickered, a crack in the polished facade. My wife is a sick woman. She has been manipulated by people who wish to destroy everything our family has built. Your wife kept records for 40 years. Ilara's voice rang through the warehouse. She recorded your conversations with Dominic Ashford. She documented every transaction, every crime, every murder you ordered. And she did it because you forced her to give up the daughter she had with Victor Mercer, the woman who became my mother. The crowd erupted. Journalists shouted questions. Cameras flashed like lightning. Caldwell's composure cracked further, rage bleeding through the politician's mask. You have no proof of any of this. I have proof that will stand up in any court. Alara felt the weight of the moment, the convergence of everything that had led to this instant. I have the paintings themselves authenticated by experts from 3 countries. I have documentation tracing their theft from Jewish families during the Holocaust. I have your father's signature on receipts from Nazi war criminals. She took another step toward him, close enough to see the fear behind his eyes. And I have witnesses, your wife, Colonel James Thatcher, who watched Victor's house for 40 years, Dr. Helena Vance, who preserved his documentation, an entire network of people who refused to let the truth die. Marcus appeared at her side, holding a folder. We also have financial records showing payments from the Caldwell Family Trust to offshore accounts controlled by Dominic Ashford, dated within weeks of Victor Mercer's death. Regular payments, continuing to this day. Ashford moved then, his hand reaching inside his jacket. But Thatcher had anticipated this. The old soldier had been watching from a side entrance, rifle hidden but ready. His voice cut across the warehouse like a whip. Do not. The rifle appeared, leveled at Ashford with the steady hands of a man who had made such shots 1,000 times before. FBI is already on their way. You are not walking out of here. Ashford froze, his hand still inside his jacket. For a moment, the entire warehouse held its breath. Then his lips curved into something that might have been a smile. You think this ends anything? The consortium is bigger than one man, bigger than one family. We have been doing this for 70 years. You have exposed one branch. The tree remains. Then we will come for the tree. Eleanor's voice echoed from the entrance. Every head turned. Eleanor Caldwell stood in the doorway, supported by a nurse, an oxygen tube running to her nose. She looked like death itself, pale and wasted, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. Eleanor, Caldwell's voice was barely a whisper. What are you doing? What I should have done 40 years ago. She moved slowly into the warehouse, each step an effort. I am testifying. Against you, against everything you represent. I have names, Richard. Every member of the consortium, every politician you have bought, every museum director who has looked the other way. I kept records because I knew this day would come. She stopped in front of her husband, looking up at him with contempt that had been buried for decades. You took everything from me, my love, my daughter, my life, but you could not take my memory. You could not take my conscience. The warehouse doors opened again. This time it was FBI agents, real ones, their badges visible, their faces grim. Behind them came Patricia Webb, the UNESCO official who had been coordinating with Marcus, along with representatives from Interpol and the Justice Department. Richard Caldwell, the lead agent, stepped forward, handcuffs glinting in the exhibition lights. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, trafficking in stolen cultural property, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Caldwell's security team moved to intervene, but found themselves surrounded by federal agents. The lawyers began their protests, but the agents had done their homework. This arrest had been coordinated at the highest levels, approved by the Attorney General herself after reviewing Eleanor's evidence. Dominic Ashford, a second agent, moved toward the man in the black suit. You are under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and violations of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Ashford did not move. His hand was still inside his jacket, fingers wrapped around what everyone assumed was a weapon. Thatcher's rifle never wavered. Do not make me do this, Thatcher said quietly. I promised Victor I would protect his family. That does not require you to be breathing. For a long moment, Ashford stood perfectly still. Then slowly he withdrew his hand. Empty. He raised both hands and allowed the agents to cuff him. But as they led him past Alara, he leaned close enough to whisper, This is not over. The consortium has resources you cannot imagine. People in positions you will never reach. We will bury you, just like we buried Victor. No. Alara met his cold eyes without flinching. Victor was alone. I am not. And every day you spend in court, every document you are forced to explain, every name that comes to light, the consortium gets smaller. You had 70 years of darkness. We have the rest of history to shine light into every corner. The crowd parted as agents led both Caldwell and Ashford through the warehouse, cameras capturing every step of their perp walk past the paintings their families had stolen. Flashbulbs exploded like stars. Reporters shouted questions. The live stream counters showed millions watching across the world. Alara watched them go, feeling something she had not expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a profound, exhausted relief, as if a weight she had not known she was carrying had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Eleanor collapsed before she could reach a chair. The nurse caught her, easing her down while calling for medical assistance. Alara rushed over, kneeling beside her grandmother. "I am sorry," Eleanor whispered. "I should have done this years ago. I should have been brave enough." "You were brave enough when it mattered." Alara gripped her hand. "Victor can rest now." "Can he?" Eleanor's eyes were distant, seeing something beyond the warehouse. "I spent so long trying to atone. I wonder if it was enough." An ambulance arrived within minutes. As paramedics loaded Eleanor onto a gurney, she reached for Alara's hand one last time. "Finish the work. There are others hidden in places you have not looked yet." Victor kept a second journal. "In the ranch. Thatcher knows where." Then she was gone, the ambulance doors closing, sirens wailing into the Brooklyn night. Marcus appeared at Alara's side. "We did it. We actually did it." She shook her head slowly. "This is just the beginning. Caldwell has lawyers, connections, decades of favors to call in. The trial will take years, and Eleanor said there are more paintings, more secrets. But the truth is out now. That is what matters. They cannot unring this bell." Alara looked around the warehouse at the paintings Victor had protected, at the crowd still marveling at works they had been told were lost forever, at the cameras that had broadcast everything to the world. Her grandfather had spent his life gathering evidence and protecting art. Her grandmother had spent hers trapped in a gilded cage, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her mother had kept the secret to protect her daughter. 3 generations of sacrifice, all leading to this moment. "No," she finally agreed. "They cannot." She found her mother in the crowd, standing before a small portrait by an artist whose name had been lost to history. Margaret was crying silently, and when Alara approached, she turned and embraced her daughter with a fierceness that spoke of years of suppressed emotion. "Your grandfather would be so proud." Margaret's voice broke. "He spent his whole life trying to do the right thing, even when the right thing cost him everything." "Did you know?" Alara pulled back to look at her mother's face. "When you told me not to go to the mansion, did you know what I would find?" "I knew enough to be afraid. Eleanor told me some of it when I was pregnant with you. She wanted me to understand the danger, to make sure you grew up far away from all of this." Margaret wiped her eyes. "But I also knew that if you were anything like Victor, you would not be able to walk away. That stubbornness runs in the blood." They stood together in the warehouse, surrounded by rescued art and vindicated truths, 2 generations of women trying to understand the legacy that had been passed to them. The weeks that followed blurred into a whirlwind of interviews, depositions, and international negotiations. Caldwell's arrest triggered a cascade of revelations as former associates rushed to cooperate with prosecutors, each one offering new evidence in exchange for leniency. The Raven Consortium, which had operated in shadows for 70 years, found itself exposed to unforgiving light. Names tumbled out like dominoes. A museum director in Boston who had knowingly displayed stolen works. A gallery owner in Chicago who had served as a middleman for illegal transactions. A congressman from Florida whose campaign had been funded by art sales that could not be legally documented. Alara testified before a Senate committee, her words broadcast live to an audience of millions. She met with families whose ancestors had been robbed, helping to arrange the return of paintings that had been missing for generations. She gave lectures at universities, appeared on news programs, became the public face of a movement to expose the hidden crimes of the art world. The trial itself began 3 months after the exhibition. Federal prosecutors brought charges that ranged from racketeering to murder for hire. Eleanor's testimony, recorded before her death, played on monitors throughout the courtroom. Her voice, weak but clear, detailed 40 years of crimes committed by the man she had been forced to marry. Alara attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery with Thatcher on one side and her mother on the other. She watched Caldwell's lawyers try to discredit the evidence, claiming the paintings were forgeries, the documents fabricated, the testimony coerced. But the prosecution had done its work well. Every claim was met with expert analysis. Every objection was overruled. On the 37th day of testimony, Dominic Ashford took a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provided detailed records of the consortium's operations, including the names of collectors and dealers in 8 countries. He testified about the murder of Victor Mercer, describing in clinical detail how the car accident had been staged. "We followed him for 3 days," Ashford said, his voice devoid of emotion, "waiting for the right location. A desert road with no witnesses. We used a vehicle with reinforced bumpers, struck his car from the side to make it roll. Then we made sure there would be no survivors." Alara listened to him describe her grandfather's murder with the detachment of someone discussing weather patterns. She wanted to feel rage, to scream at this man who showed no remorse for taking a life, but all she felt was a cold, hard certainty that justice would be served. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Caldwell showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to 40 years in federal prison. He was 72 years old. He would die behind bars. Ashford received 25 years. His testimony had earned him some leniency, but not much. Outside the courthouse, Alara stood before a sea of microphones and cameras. "Today's verdict does not bring Victor Mercer back," she said. "It does not undo the suffering of the families whose art was stolen. It does not erase 7 decades of crimes, but it proves that even the powerful can be held accountable. That truth, no matter how long it takes, will eventually be heard." A reporter called out, "What will you do now?" Alara thought about the mansion in the Mojave, about the second journal Eleanor had mentioned, about all the work that still needed to be done. "I'm going home, and I am going to continue what my grandfather started." Eleanor Caldwell died 6 weeks after the exhibition, peacefully in her sleep at the Alexandria house she had called her prison. Alara was with her at the end, holding her grandmother's hand as the old woman slipped away. In her final hours, Eleanor had smiled, the first genuine smile Alara had seen on her face. "We did it." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "Victor can rest now." The funeral was small, attended only by family and a handful of people who had known Eleanor before her marriage. Richard Caldwell was not there. He had been denied permission to attend. Alara arranged for Eleanor to be buried in the desert, in a small cemetery near Victor's mansion. The headstone was simple: Eleanor Victoria Ashworth Caldwell, 1947 to 2020, beloved mother and grandmother, finally free. Beside her, Alara placed a second stone, one that had been missing for 40 years. Victor Edward Mercer, 1942-1984. He did not surrender. He only ran out of time. The paintings were dispersed according to Victor's wishes, which Alara found in the second journal Thatcher had kept hidden in a false panel of his workshop. Works stolen from Jewish families went to their descendants or to Holocaust memorial institutions. Pieces by forgotten artists were donated to museums, with conditions requiring the artists' names to be displayed prominently. The Caravaggio, the crown jewel of the collection, was returned to the Vatican, which had listed it as destroyed for decades. But the second journal revealed something more. Victor had found additional works over the years, pieces he had not yet moved to the mansion's vault. Some were in storage facilities scattered across the Southwest. Others had been placed with trusted individuals, people who had agreed to hold them until the right moment came. Over the next year, Alara tracked down each piece: a Vermeer hidden in a bank vault in Albuquerque, 3 works by Frida Kahlo that had been stolen from a private collection in Mexico City, a collection of African masks that had been looted during the colonial era, waiting in a warehouse in Phoenix for someone to return them home. Each discovery brought new challenges, new legal battles, new confrontations with people who claimed ownership. But Alara had learned from Victor's mistakes. She moved fast, documented everything, and never worked alone. In return for her role in recovering the art, various institutions offered finder's fees that, combined, made her financially secure for the first time in her life. She used most of it to establish the Mercer Foundation, dedicated to tracking down stolen art and supporting the artists and families who had been robbed. Marcus became the foundation's director. Rachel Chen served as lead investigator. Dr. Reyes headed the authentication team, And Thatcher, who claimed he was too old for such work, somehow ended up on staff as head of security. Spring came to the Mojave with wildflowers and soft rains, transforming the desert into a carpet of color. Alara stood on the porch of Victor's mansion, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The house had been restored, its crumbling walls repaired, its boarded windows replaced with glass that caught the light like jewels. The transformation had taken 8 months. A team of contractors had worked under Thatcher's supervision, restoring the mansion to its original glory while adding modern security systems and climate control for the artwork that would be displayed. The grand foyer gleamed with polished wood and fresh paint. The study had been converted into a research library. The cellar, where Victor's vault had been, now served as a temperature-controlled storage facility for pieces awaiting authentication or return to their rightful owners. The Mercer Heritage Center, as it was now called, had welcomed its first visitors the week before. School groups and tourists and survivors of forgotten atrocities, all coming to see the place where Victor had hidden his treasures and to learn about the hidden history of art theft. Alara had designed the exhibits herself, telling the story not just of the paintings, but of the people who had created them, owned them, stolen them, and ultimately saved them. In the main gallery, each painting was accompanied by 3 placards. The first described the artwork itself, the artist, the technique, the historical context. The second told the story of how it had been stolen, documenting the crime with dates and names and evidence. The third explained how it had been recovered and where it would ultimately go. Visitors moved through the space in hushed reverence, pausing before each work, reading each story. Some wept, some stood in silent contemplation. All of them left changed by what they had witnessed. Thatcher came by most afternoons, sitting on the porch with his rifle across his knees, keeping watch out of 40 years of habit. He had never said much about his friendship with Victor, but Alara had pieced together the story from old letters and faded photographs. 2 men who had served their country in different ways, bound together by shared values and mutual respect. He would be proud of you. Thatcher broke the comfortable silence, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Victor spent his whole life waiting for someone to finish what he started. You did more than finish it. You made it mean something. Alara thought about that, about meaning and legacy and the long arc of truth. I found a letter in his study last week, one I had not seen before. He wrote it the night before he died. What did it say? That he knew they were coming for him, that he had made his peace with it, and that he believed someone would come someday, someone brave enough or foolish enough to see it through. She smiled, a bittersweet expression that held both grief and gratitude. He ended it, saying that the only way any of his work would matter is if someone brought it into the light. Thatcher nodded slowly. Sounds like him. Always had a way with words, even when the words were hard to hear. They sat in silence as the sun sank below the horizon, the sky deepening from gold to purple to the deep blue of desert night. Stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had watched over this place for millennia, indifferent to the human dramas playing out beneath them. Alara thought about her mother, who had finally come to visit for an extended stay. Margaret was inside now, helping to catalog a new shipment of documents that had been donated by a former associate of the consortium seeking immunity. The 2 of them were building a relationship that had been stunted by decades of secrets, learning to be mother and daughter without the weight of hidden truths between them. She thought about Eleanor, the grandmother she had barely known, whose final act had been to destroy the man she had been forced to marry. There was a kind of justice in that, a closing of circles that felt almost mythic in its completeness. And she thought about Victor, the grandfather she had never met except in memory and imagination. The man who had seen clearly in a world determined to remain blind. The man who had sacrificed everything for a truth he knew might never be told. I am staying. The words came out before she had consciously decided to say them. Here in the desert. This is where I belong now. Thatcher smiled, a rare expression on his weathered face. Figured you would say that. The desert gets into your blood after a while. Hard to leave once it has a hold on you. It is not just the desert. Alara stood, moving to the railing where she could see the Heritage Center's lights glowing in the gathering darkness. It is the work. There are so many paintings still missing. So many families still waiting for answers. Victor started something here. Someone needs to keep it going. Sounds like a lifetime's worth of trouble. Probably. She turned back to face him, her expression resolute. But some trouble is worth having. Some fights are worth fighting, even if you never see the end. The next morning, Alara woke early and walked through the Heritage Center before it opened. The paintings hung in carefully lit alcoves, each one telling a story of loss and recovery. Visitors would see beautiful art, would learn about techniques and history, and the masters who had wielded their brushes centuries ago. But the deeper story was written in the spaces between, in the names of families torn apart by war, in the silence of artists whose voices had been stolen. She stopped before a small watercolor that had arrived just the week before. A simple landscape, hills and salt, and a river winding through farmland. It had hung in a Jewish home in Poland until 1940, had been seized by Nazi officers and sold through a network of dealers and collectors that stretched from Berlin to Boston. For 80 years it had been missing, presumed destroyed. Now it was here. Home in a way, even if the home it had been taken from no longer existed. The door opened behind her. A woman in her 60s entered, accompanied by a young man who might have been her son. They moved through the exhibition slowly, stopping before each painting, reading each placard with careful attention. When they reached the watercolor, the woman stopped. Her hand rose to her mouth. Tears began to flow. "This was my grandmother's." Her voice was barely audible. "She described it to my mother, who described it to me. I never thought I would see it." Alara approached quietly. "Would you like to hear its story?" For the next hour, she told them everything she knew about the painting's journey, where it had been taken, who had bought it, how it had passed through dozens of hands before finally coming to rest in this place of memory and restoration. The woman wept, and her son wept, and Alara found herself weeping too. This was why it mattered. Not the money, not the fame, not even the justice served. This, right here, a family reconnected to its past, a grandmother's memory made tangible across the vast divide of years. When they left, the woman embraced Alara with fierce gratitude. "Thank you for everything you have done, for not letting them win." Alara watched them go, something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Not just purpose or connection, but something deeper. Legacy, the sense that her life had become part of a story larger than herself. That afternoon, a delivery truck arrived with a package from the National Archives. Inside were documents related to another case Victor had been investigating before his death. A collection of Russian Orthodox icons stolen during the Bolshevik Revolution, believed to have been smuggled into the United States by a white Russian émigré who later sold them to American collectors seeking exotic pieces for their private museums. Alara spread the documents across the work table in the study, the room that had become her office. Shipping manifests, letters of authentication, a list of buyers that included 2 names she recognized from the Raven Consortium files. The work was not finished. Perhaps it never would be. She picked up her phone and called Marcus. "I need you to look into something. Russian icons, circa 1920s, last known location unclear. Victor had a file on them." "How many?" Marcus's voice carried the familiar energy of a new hunt. 7, maybe more. Worth approximately $2 million at current market prices. But that is not why they matter. Why do they matter? Because they were stolen from churches that were destroyed after the theft. For some families, these icons are the only physical connection to their heritage, their only proof that their ancestors existed. A pause on the other end of the line. Then, "I will have Rachel start digging. Dr. Schwam. Reyes can help with authentication if we find anything. This will take months." "I have time." Alara looked out the window at the desert, at the Heritage Center, at the work that stretched before her like an endless horizon. "I have the rest of my life." That evening, she sat in Victor's study, surrounded by his books and maps and the artifacts of a life dedicated to truth. On the desk lay his journal, open to the final entry. "If this reaches you, know that the truth does not require perfection, only persistence. Know that the powerful seem invincible until they are not. Know that one voice speaking clearly in the darkness can change the course of history. You found my truth, now make it yours." Alara closed the journal and looked out the window at the desert sky, alive with stars. Somewhere out there, collections waited to be discovered, secrets to be exposed, families to be reunited with what had been stolen. The Raven Consortium was broken, But the problem it represented was older and larger than any single organization. The work was not finished. Perhaps it never would be. But tonight, in this place that had become her home, surrounded by the voices of those who had been silenced, Alara felt something she had not felt in years. Not just peace, but certainty. The certainty that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you are meant to do. She picked up a pen and began to write in a new journal, one that would record her own journey as Victor had recorded his. The first words came easily, as if they had been waiting for her all along. My grandfather spent his life gathering evidence of crimes that powerful people wanted forgotten. He died protecting those secrets, believing that someday someone would have the courage to speak them aloud. I am that someone, but I am not alone. Every family that reclaims a stolen painting, every artist whose name is restored to their work, every truth that replaces a lie, they are all speaking with me. This is not my story. It is our story, and it has only just begun. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the sage and creosote, carrying secrets that had waited decades to be told. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent witnesses to the small human drama playing out below. But in the study of the Mercer Heritage Center, a light burned late into the night, as a woman wrote the first chapter of a new story built on the foundation of the old. The end of one journey, the beginning of another, and the truth, no longer buried, spreading like dawn across a world that had been dark for far too long.